There are a ton of great eligible defensemen in this year's draft, but which one is the best one for the Blue Jackets? We're going to talk about that on today's Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get things started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms over on YouTube. And I also have to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more because right now, new customers are going to get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That is $150 whether you win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. Brock Otten is back today, scout of McKeen's hockey, or director of scouting at McKeen's Hockey, I should say, to give him his full title. Yesterday, we talked all about Artem Levshinov, whether he could be a fit for the Blue Jackets. Today, we're talking about a different draft-eligible defenseman, this one playing in the OHL. We're talking about Sam Dickinson of the London Knights and whether he could potentially leapfrog every prospect that the Blue Jackets have in their pool right now, every defensive prospect, that is to say, that the Blue Jackets have in their pool right now. So I'm just going to get right into my conversation with Brock. We've got Brock Otten of McKeen's Hockey back today. Yesterday, we talked about Artem Levshinov, and today we're looking at a different defenseman because I feel like every time I turn around in this draft, there's another defenseman that's probably going to go in the top 5, and I can't keep all of them straight. So let's kind of just start off with the basics. The Blue Jackets have drafted Sam Dickinson. What kind of player are they getting?
They're getting a very safe and projectable defender. This is one of the best skaters in the draft period, forward or defense. And that obviously gives him a very unique upside because a scouting staff is going to look at that skating ability and think of all the different ways that they can use it. Dickinson's also a solid two-way player already. And I think that projection is going to carry over to the NHL level as well. He's somebody who makes a great exit pass, somebody who is really sound in his decision-making as he moves up the ice. I think earlier in the year, we saw him pressing a little bit to try to create offense. I think that that's natural as players are in their draft year and they're trying to put up points. And I think the one thing that Dickinson realized is, look, I can just play my game. I can keep things simple and I can still be an offensive point producer because of the way that I skate, the way that I can move the puck, and the way that I can do things in the offensive end. His big point shot gives him a lot of upside as a power play quarterback, or at least as a trigger man to somebody maybe who is a little bit more creative on the point. I know that Columbus has some of those players. Somebody like Devin Matejchuk kind of comes to mind as somebody who could make a really good and interesting pairing partner for Sam Dickinson.
Obviously, we talked about this a little bit in the first profile that we did. The Blue Jackets have a lot of defensive prospects. They've got a lot of defensive prospects, too many, almost. Where would Sam Dickinson kind of fit in with, the Jiricek, the Matejchuk? I'm really high on Stanislav Svozil. Maybe a little bit too high, maybe I'm a little bit biased, but where do you think Sam Dickinson kind of fits in with the guys that the Blue Jackets already have in that pool?
Yeah, I would say that he's a bit of a Frankenstein of amalgamating all the Columbus blue line prospects, right? He has that skating ability that some of the guys do. He has that physicality. He has that size. He has that reach. He has that mobility. He is the best of everything that Columbus has in the system in one defender. And that's why he is a potential top pairing, or at least a solid number 3. And I think that is sort of where the value in Dickinson comes from, is that he is a very safe defensive prospect as a top 4 defender, in my opinion. At the very least, I think you're getting like a Brady Shea or Darnell Nurse type who can be a solid number 2 or 3. I think that if his creativity, his puck skill, his defensive presence in terms of his physicality continues to evolve, we're looking at a really slam dunk number 1. If it doesn't, I think he's still a solid second pairing guy because he just skates so well. He makes such great decisions. And I think that is going to carry over really, really well. So I think that he's somebody that on the highest of his upside is going to be the best of that group that Columbus has. And that includes David Jiricek. I think on the downside of that, he's somebody they could pair one of their more offensively oriented guys with to sort of be that steady presence.
Yeah, and that's something that the Blue Jackets haven't had for a little while now, is they have had a ton of guys that are kind of really great offensive defensemen and really solid two-way guys, but like I don't think they've had a solid shutdown defenseman since like David Savard in 2018. So it's been a minute. So Dickinson is going to be a really interesting prospect, I think, in that. Not that he's like solely a shutdown guy, since he's had, 70 points this season, which again, as a defenseman and as a young 17 as well in the OHL, he's got the late birthday. He's kind of slated at the minute, looking at kind of the rankings on Elite Prospect, is anywhere from like 3rd to 7th, which is kind of about where the Blue Jackets are going to be drafting. Is that where you think he falls, or do you think he's going to fall out of that kind of top 5 to 7 range based on other guys that are kind of maybe improving their draft stock, or what?
Yeah, I think that the playoffs and his performance for London is going to go a long way as to where he ends up getting selected. I think that there's going to be a lot of eyes on him as London moves forward in the playoffs, and the pressure builds and the pace picks up, the physicality picks up. Scouts are going to be looking to see how he handles that. And if he handles that really well, which I anticipate he will, I think he's kind of locked in that top 7, top 8 range. I think that even if teams have a preference to a guy like Salayev, who probably has a bit of higher defensive ceiling because he has that same mobility, but just in a larger package. But I think that there are scouts who are definitely going to value him over William, over St. Perec, over Carter Yakimchuk, over Levshunov, because there's that safety to his game that Levshunov doesn't have. I think that that's where I don't see him escaping the top 7 or 8. Somebody's going to look at Dickinson and say, look, at worst, this is somebody who is going to be still a really good 20-minute a night guy for us in the future. And at best, he's the best defenseman on our team. And I think when you get that high ceiling and high floor, you have to jump on that opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. Coming up in just a second, I've got more of my conversation with Brock. But first, I'm going to tell you about FanDuel, because it's playoff time in the NBA and the NHL. Baseball is in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. Right now, new customers are going to get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. Whether you win or lose, $150 is going to be yours. But on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, or on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. I am going to have to decide who I'm rooting for in the playoffs soon. Who am I gonna bandwagon this year, and who am I gonna put some money on at FanDuel? But what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on. Make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. We talked a little bit about Levshunov and being patient with him. Obviously, with Dickinson being in the OHL, he's subject to the CBA that, again, we talked about in the last profile. So he's locked into basically the OHL or the NHL until he's 20. What do you think his development path looks like? Is he a guy that stays in the OHL with London until kind of he's 19, 20 years old, or is he a guy that you think could make that jump to pro a little bit earlier than that?
I think he could play in the NHL next year if he has a really good summer. I really do. I think he's one of the more pro-ready prospects available in the draft this year, just because he has that size, that mobility. I think that even if he's overwhelmed a little bit physically, which is bound to happen as a rookie or even a second-year defender, I think that he's able to do a lot with his feet and with his hands, and I think that that's going to help him sort of escape the pressure that NHL forecheck brings. I think he is somebody that definitely could play next year with a really good summer. Obviously, he could be sent back for his 19-year-old season, which wouldn't hurt. London's going to be solid again next year. He'll be right in the forefront of that. He's going to get better at both ends. There's nothing wrong with being patient. I just think that he's somebody who could force somebody's hand with him coming into training camp, and NHL teams seeing just how well he skates in comparison to the defenders that they currently have on their roster, and thinking, okay, like we can definitely find a way to use this guy and develop him by, playing him on the third pairing and bringing him along slowly and letting him build confidence at the pro level. Because I think that he's capable of it. Like I said, I think that probably he and Anton Salayev and obviously Macklin Celebrini are among the most pro-ready players in the draft this year.
Yeah. I mean, I always think about Cole Sillinger coming into training camp, and basically they sat down with him in the training camp and were like, listen, we're looking for a reason to get rid of you, and we don't have one. So I guess you're sticking around. And he played his entire 18-year-old season in the NHL and had a great rookie season. Obviously had it fell off a little bit in the second season, but I don't think that was entirely his fault. So I'm not really going to blame him for that.
Yeah.
In terms of Dickinson, what does he need to work on to kind of just take that extra step? Obviously, you said he's probably one of the more pro-ready players right now, but what does he have to do kind of in the playoffs with London over the summer, come into training camp? Like, what is the one thing that he needs to work on to really kind of make sure that he is in the best possible place for an NHL team to come to him in training camp and say, listen, we keep looking for a reason to send you back to juniors and we're not finding one? Like, what does he need to do to get that, to have that conversation?
Yeah, I'll give you two things. And the one is something that I think he's improved a lot on already this year, and that's the decision-making as he's trying to lead in transition. I think that he makes a good exit pass, but when he tries to use his feet, sometimes he gets bottled up in the neutral zone. Sometimes he just doesn't see it. He kind of becomes very, very narrow-minded. He doesn't have the elite vision or creativity to make things happen the way that a guy like Zane Parekh does when he gets boxed in. So he kind of skates himself into trouble. And that decision-making just needs to be that little bit quicker, right? And that's something that I think he's going to have to work on if he wants to be an impact offensive defender at the NHL level. And then I think in the defensive end, he sometimes gets caught puck watching, especially when he's defending the slot. Sometimes he just kind of is a little bit too passive. And I think when you look at the frame, when you look at the reach, when you look at the potential as a defensive player, I think he's going to figure things out. But right now, there's a lot of that in his game where he's just caught in the middle, not really guarding anybody and not really having the kind of impact as a defensive player that he can have. And I think just cleaning that up within a system of whoever drafts him is going to be integral to him sticking around in the NHL next year.
To kind of follow on from the thread of him, London obviously is going to be a solid team again. I feel like London is always a solid team and has been since legitimately since 2004, but there's obviously wherever Dickinson goes, he's likely going to be playing on a not great NHL team next year. What do you think is there benefit to him playing NHL minutes on a bad team or going back to London and being the guy there? This is a conversation that we had about Kent Johnson when he was drafted. Should he come to the NHL? Should he go back to Michigan and be the guy there? And obviously he ended up signing his entry level after his sophomore year, I think it was. What's the benefit for Dickinson either way? If he goes to the NHL, plays on a bad team, or is that in the long run getting to play big minutes for a bad NHL team going to be better for his development than playing a lot of not necessarily easy minutes, but he's probably going to have an easier season in London than playing for example, the 2024-25 Columbus Blue Jackets?
Yeah, and that's the $1 million question about development, really, is when do you want those players to take that next step? When is it rushing a player and when is it the right time? A guy like Dickinson, I think will show you, right? You have that small game window to see what a player can bring, the preseason and then a few NHL games to see what they've got and see how they handle things. And usually those players will show you, yes, they're ready, or no, they're not. And if Dickinson goes back to the OHL, the focus will be on improving that creativity, improving that puck skill to increase his offensive upside, right? To really take his offensive game to the next level, being less of, say, a trigger man or yet less of a guy that is really dangerous away from the puck. And if you watch a lot of the London Knights, that's where Dickinson excels, is away from the puck. He's very aggressive. He gets the green light a lot from the London Knights coaching staff and the way that they play to really jump up into the rush using his speed. And he's sort of that second or third guy in a lot, especially following turnovers. He defends high in the zone, has a great stick. He'll force a turnover and then he's gone. And then it's a 2-on-1, it's a 3-on-2. And he's the one being right in the middle of those odd man rushes. And that's not something you see all the time from defenders. I know it's a little bit more common in today's day and age with, I'm not going to say positionless hockey, but more of those hybrid style defenders. And with his skating ability, that's something you definitely want to see. But I think if he goes back to the OHL, it's, how can Dickinson develop as an offensive player with the puck on his stick and not being just so reliant on his ability to find those soft spots and use his speed away from the puck to be an offensive option. And then obviously the defensive things that I mentioned, just taking that physicality to the next level. I think of a guy like Thomas Harley, who had to go back to the OHL for a few years from the Dallas system because they really wanted him to be more of a physical presence in the defensive end. He had that size and he relied on his skating ability almost too much and wasn't aggressive enough, knowing that I am a fantastic skater. I'm the best skater on the ice. I can be aggressive. I can take chances defensively to try to blow plays up because I am the best skater on the ice. I look at a guy like Jake Sanderson, right? That's where he excels. That's why Jake Sanderson was such a high pick, is because not only was he the best skater on the ice, he used it to his advantage on the defensive end to be so aggressive. Yes, did it burn him sometimes? Absolutely. But he was able to be everywhere, almost like a one-man wrecking crew. And I think that Thomas Harley was able to sort of go back in Mississauga for a few years and do that and improve his defensive play and improve that sort of physical intensity and consistency. And I think that if Dickinson goes back, that's going to be a main focus for him too.
Going to finish up my conversation with Brock in just a second, but first I'm going to tell you all about Sleeper, because the season's basically over for the Blue Jackets right now, and I think the less said about their performance in this season, the better. But you could win big by playing Daily Fantasy Hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. They're our number one choice for daily fantasy sports, and especially daily fantasy hockey, because you can win 100 times your cash in those contests. They've also got NFL, NBA, MLB, college football, but let's be honest, I'm here for the hockey, and I think that you are as well. Entries can be made in under a minute. All you have to do is pick whether guys like McDavid, Ovechkin, Crosby, McKinnon are going to record more or less than their sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus minus, and more in any given game. To win 100 times your money on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. That's right, Blue Jackets fans. You can win 100 times your money by getting 8 questions right. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll go up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Obviously, with you being Ontario-based, you watch a lot of the OHL. I want to just kind of finish up here by checking in with a couple of our guys that are in the playoffs right now. Obviously, Max McHugh, teammate with Dickinson in London, is not having maybe as much of an impact as a guy like Dickinson, but is still, there's a benefit to playing playoff hockey, in that it's that you get to play the playoff hockey and you don't get the early summer. But the guy that I'm really interested in is Luca Pinelli, who the Blue Jackets drafted in the 4th round, and then Luca Pinelli proceeded to make every single team in the OHL look silly this season, and appears that he's dragging the 67. I'm going to knock on wood here because it's obviously, they're only up 2-1 in the series, I think, but he's decided that he's dragging the Ottawa 67s to the second round of the playoffs, whether the team wants to go or not. What's been your impression of Pinelli this season?
Yeah, he's had a really good year. I think that there are some areas of his game that have really taken that next step. Obviously, the first one is the shot and the confidence in his shooting ability. I think that we saw that as a draft eligible player in sort of spades. It was very inconsistent. I think that he was having some problems getting into the middle of the ice and finding those soft spots consistently because just the strength and the confidence wasn't quite there yet. And this year we're seeing that reach that next level. He's hungrier all the time. That consistency away from the puck has just always been there this year. And that's why he's scoring so many goals. Is he has that high end shot, but now he's earning those touches a lot more consistently this year. I think that comes from just work that he's put on put in from a strength perspective. He's just stronger on and off the puck, and it's able to, allowing him to be able to get more opportunities to score. And when you look at Pinelli, I think you have to look at the development of his off-puck play as well. I think he's become better as a two-way player. I think that the forechecking ability has been more consistent. I think that the skating has taken a nice little step forward. I don't think he was ever a weak skater, but I think that when you combine the fact that he's a little bit undersized, that's one of the reasons why he fell to the fourth round. There were some projection concerns, similar to Jordan Dumais, right? That you've got a smaller player who's not the most dynamic skater. That can be a very difficult thing for players to overcome. It has been previously, and it will continue to be. So I think that's sort of the key for Luca moving forward, is to continue to improve, to get better as a skater. That's going to be the key for him. I think he's proven that he's skilled enough. He's proven that he's hungry enough. He's proven that he has that shot to at least be a really solid complementary guy who can be sort of a workhorse away from the puck and score when he gets that opportunity. But the skating needs to continue to evolve. And I think that Blue Jackets fans and the Blue Jackets organization has to be ecstatic with the steps forward that he's taken this year.
Yeah, so a fun thing about Luca Pinelli is, I think I've told this story on the show before, but at the beginning of the year, I like to make my 25 to 30 player list of prospects that I want to kind of touch on as I'm doing my prospect work, try and get, prospect experts to come on and talk about them. And it was near the end, and I was like, oh, Luca Pinelli's still on this list, despite the fact that he doesn't seem to be anywhere on anyone's draft board. Let's do one anyway. And so I had Hadi Kalakesh of Double Prospects come on. He loves Pinelli, gave a really great draft profile, and then obviously the fourth round comes around, and the Blue Jackets draft Luca Pinelli, and I'm like, oh, hey, I have a bunch of resources about him already, despite the fact that he somehow fell to the fourth round. So it's always interesting to see where guys get ranked on scouting boards versus public boards versus NHL scout boards. Kind of to that note, just to kind of finish off, obviously Pinelli was in the conversation for the first round at the beginning of the season and then kind of fell to the fourth round. Has kind of become a little bit of a hidden gem for the Blue Jackets organization. Is there anyone that you could, in the OHL specifically, that you're thinking about that's like, man, he's probably going to drop in the draft, but whoever does pick him up is going to have a really great prospect on their hands?
That's a really good question. It's not something I've really thought about yet. The one name that sort of came to mind immediately is Zane Parekh, and I don't think he's going to fall that far, but it wouldn't shock me at all if people sort of overthink things and NHL scouts sort of overthink things, and he ends up being in that 13, 14 range. I don't think it's likely. I think we're seeing him really push up draft boards. We're seeing him in that 5, 6, 7 range a lot now. We're even seeing him ranked above Dickinson by some scouting outlets. But at the end of the day, we're looking at a player who plays in a very offensive heavy system in Saginaw. The reason that he's scoring as much as he does is because he is incredibly skilled and creative. I'm not trying to take anything away from him there. But this is a very unique system that Saginaw employs. It's very almost positionless hockey. It definitely allows players to be creative and to have those freedoms to join the rush from the defensive end. And that's why we're seeing some struggles on the defensive end from Parekh. I think that there are a lot of great moments on the defensive end. There are a lot of not so great moments. And when you look at him being not the biggest defender, I think NHL scouts are going to have some questions as to whether he can be somebody who sees a really consistent shift 5-on-5, or is he more of a power play guy? I think there's going to be NHL scouts, and I know that there are some who think of him more of a Shane Goddesbehere guy, right? That type of player. And is that the kind of guy you're drafting 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th? Probably not, right? They're probably, again, we brought up Z Bouillon. I think Bouillon is way ahead of Parekh in the defensive end at this current moment. I think that in almost every regard. And he's not as dynamic or creative as Zane Parekh is. And don't get me wrong, I prefer Zane Parekh over Z Bouillon at this point. But I can see why people would prefer Bouillon. I could see why people prefer a guy like even Kartem Yakimchuk, who I think has some defensive inefficiencies, just like Zane Parekh does. But there's the margin for error is just a little bit more for him because he just has that size and reach that Parekh doesn't have, right? And That's not going to change, unfortunately. So I could see him maybe falling a little bit, and then people being, kind of up in arms about that, and then him proving people wrong that he should have been one of the top defenders taken because he is that good. But that's sort of the first name that came to mind in terms of somebody like falling outside of the first round from the OHL. I'll give you a name like Jet Luchenko. He's somebody that I really, really like. I think that he should be a first-round pick. But he's one of those types, other than his skating ability and the IQ and his playmaking ability, he doesn't really jump off the page in a lot of areas. He's just a very well-rounded player. And sometimes those guys do fall a little bit. Insert Owen Beck. Right. I think that's a great example of a guy who fell out of the first round, who a lot of people had inside that first round, and does look like a pretty solid pick at this point. I think a lot of the guys from the OHL are kind of ranked accordingly. And I think that there won't be too many surprises. I think there's a team that's going to really like Liam Greentree, and they're going to take him high. I think that teams are going to be really intrigued by Beckett Seneca's offensive potential because of his physical abilities and the physical upside that he has. So I think that he's sort of locked in that first round range. I don't expect Zane Parekh to fall that far. If we're talking about the draft, and I know you said OHL, I think the big guy is obviously Trevor Connolly, just because of the off-ice stuff, right? There's somebody that is talented enough to be a top 10, top 12 pick, but with all the noise from things that have occurred off the ice, and not recently, but in previous years. And there was that article that came out, I believe it was written by Katie Strang, that talked about just some of the complications with previous coaches, previous teammates. NHL teams are going to do their due diligence. They're going to interview him a lot. I would be shocked if he is the most interviewed player at the NHL Combine when it happens. And what happens from those conversations, or what is derived from those conversations, is going to go a long way as to whether he is somebody that falls outside the first round completely. Maybe, and teams end up regretting that. I think back to Brendan Saad, who was ranked pretty firmly as a first round pick out of the OHL a few years ago, or many years ago now. I'm dating myself. Yeah, I'm dating myself a little bit.
Saad is a funny one, because I realized the other day that he's played almost 900 NHL games, and I remember his rookie season. So
yes, so dating myself a little bit, but that was a guy that the teams kind of soured on based off of some inconsistencies in his game, and he ends up playing 900 NHL games and should have easily been a first round pick the way that he was projected to be, right? Sometimes they get it right, sometimes they get it wrong. That's the fun in what we're discussing here, right? And why we have so many amazing amateur scouting organizations like us at McKeen's Hockey, because people want to read about this stuff, and because it's fascinating, and because nobody has that crystal ball. Nobody knows how this is going to turn out. We all like to claim we do. We all like to talk about our wins, right? But at the end of the day, these are kids. They're very hard to predict as to how they end up developing, and that's the fun of it.
Yeah, I always love doing these prospect profiles, because again, I always say that I know just enough about NHL prospects to make me dangerous. I can only cover so many players at one time, and so with this and some other work that I do, I can't cover every single prospect. So it's great to have people come on and say, okay, what you think is just to confirm what I've been thinking about a player, or saying, oh, actually, here's a different angle and stuff. And it's always so interesting to talk to people about prospects. You mentioned McKeen's Hockey there at the end, obviously. If people want more draft stuff in their life, I don't know if McKeen's Hockey has rankings coming out soon, but where can people find those? Where can people find your work online?
Yeah, McKeensHockey.com. We had rankings come out for our midseason. We won't have a new set of rankings until our draft guide. We only usually do 3 rankings over the course of a year. But in particular with Sam Dickinson, we have a free profile that I wrote, a free scouting report on him on McKeensHockey.com. Tons of great information on Dickinson, lots of video breakdown of each of his skills. So if you're curious on more information on Sam Dickinson, you can check it out at McKeensHockey.com as well as all of the other draft prospects this year.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming to hang out, talk about Sam Dickinson, and obviously talk about Levshinov as well.
Yeah, my pleasure. Anytime, Jay.
That's all I've got for today. Tomorrow, we are going to try our best to get an episode. I don't know why I say we. I'm going to try my best to get an episode out tomorrow. I am traveling today, so only maybe. But if we do have an episode tomorrow, it's going to be recapping tonight's game against the Tampa Bay Lightning, which I'm sure is going to be fun for everyone and not terrible. Thank you for listening to this episode, for making it your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets continues to be free and available on all podcast platforms, on YouTube and on SiriusXM. I've been Jake Foster. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets on Twitter and on Instagram. And if you have any questions, comments, criticisms, you can email me at locksedonbluejackets@gmail.com. Thank you once again for listening. And until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.